Hey guys, it's Clint. The title of this video could be, "This is why we can't have nice things." I don't know. There's many titles, but I'll tell you, there's certain phrase that we're going to be talking about that I can't put in the title because I will be demonetized if I do. And I think even the fact that I just said demonetized, this video will probably be demonetized. But I got to talk about this because there's so much cringe. It is deafening. So before we get into this, we're gonna look at some Bleeding Cool. Fair warning, I do want to show you though. I don't think I've showed this off yet. Maybe I have. This is a cover that Matt Weldon did to go with Downcast #1. This is for Downcast Part 2, and that will complete the series. But I just wanted to show this off because it's amazing, and he put so much detail into the city. I'm really, really excited to see this colored. I wanted to show it off. Also, just to let you know, Downcast has been lettered, and we're going through the editing process right now, which means, a few little tweaks here and there. No doubt there will be a lot of, massaging just to make sure it's just right. But so far, so good. I'm really looking forward to getting Downcast shipped out to everybody who backed the campaign. So thank you very much. All right. On the same day that this article came out, bookstores will sell more comics than comic book stores in 2019. Wow, that is amazing in probably not a good way. I doubt it's because there are more bookstores that are selling comics, and it has more to do with the fact that comic book shops are selling fewer comics. I don't know, maybe a little bit of both. Maybe. I don't think so. As far as I know, for the regular standard bookstore market, things are not doing very well for them. But this is not actually the topic of this video. It's weird to me how people can keep an eye on simultaneously this happening. Comic book shops are struggling desperately to get by. They're closing shop, and comics are being sold elsewhere besides comic book shops. And at the same time, you've got something like this happening. House of X and white nationalism. That's the phrase that I will all be demonetized for. So sorry about that. You've been infected. Here's the thing. This right here in a nutshell, this is why you've had all of the problems with comics in current year that you've been having. All of the books that have been focusing so heavily on their content and being inclusive and being progressive and all those kinds of things, they're bending over backward to make the pseudo academics that freshly got out of their fresh brainwashing from college, and then they decided to that they're geniuses and they deserve to have commentary on how entertainment and media should be portrayed. You saw this happen with Disney princesses. I know I've done videos with this before, but people will go through college and they'll write papers. I had to do this once to pass a class. It's kind of shameful, but you have to go and you have to look at media. You pick something, some kind of movie or something, and then you go through all the reasons why it's problematic, because in the course you've learned any possible thing that could be problematic. Not just that, but you learned tools to suss out new things that are problematic that would not have been problematic before. So as long as you can make an argument for something being just terrible, I don't want to use the word problematic again. That's just too many. I think I've reached the limit for this video. But if you can find obnoxious things in, that don't align with your politics and comics, then, you've got a winning a paper. Okay, so here's the thing. You get one book, finally. How many years has it been? And you get a book, apparently, which I haven't read. I've only been doing indie comics lately. But I've heard really good things about Jonathan Hickman's run on X-Men. This one, final issue of Powers of X. There's also House of X. And these books have been, by all accounts, very well written. You can look anywhere from any side of any political spectrum. People have been really impressed with Jonathan Hickman, and I know he's done a lot of great work in the past on, his own creator-owned titles and things like that. He is somebody, too, as a creator that I respect because he's very down to earth. If you look up any interview with Jonathan Hickman, he's just the kind of guy that you could just have a conversation with, and he's just very level-headed. So he put together what he thought would be a mainstream comic success, something that people could be excited about and love and enjoy. Turns out he was able to achieve that. Now, that's not enough. You can't have one title that's just meant to be good and entertaining without the other shoe falling. And that is the shrill voices of people that feel like comics entertainment is secondary to propaganda. And so they want to put the propaganda first. So here, let's jump into this Bleeding Cool article. Last week saw the final issue of Powers of X #6 by Jonathan Hickman and R.B. Silva, and the conclusion of the weekly run for the last 3 months between that title and House of X, setting up the new dawn of X titles. It saw Charles Xavier abandon both his dreams of integration of mutant kind and humanity in favor of, and for want of a better phrase, a two-state solution. Okay, so we're getting into politics here. Here's the thing. In comics, I have no problem if you are exploring ideas that possibly might be explored in the real world, political ideas. This to me is not a problem in comics because you can actually get some really, really interesting stories in this kind of world, and it's all fictional. It's all safe. You can explore these kind of things. You can go nuts with what people could do under such circumstances. What I think it's a mistake to do is to say, if a comic book talks about and explores these kinds of ideas, that therefore it's espousing those kinds of politics. Okay, and the reason why this comes up is because the people that are scrutinizing this, though, again, we already talked about them, really, really, really progressive, so-called regressive people that think that everything is politics and it should be politics. So they see this as sending a message rather than exploring an idea. They're two very different things. Okay, so I guess in the books, it talks about a two-state solution, one for humanity and one for mutantity. So again, they're going to jump to the conclusion of this having to do with racial nationalism. Now, I'll tell you, if you've read any X-Men comics, it's not actually about race. I mean, all the X-Men have, various races. They're from diverse backgrounds as it is. Being a mutant is a totally different thing. And here's the quote they pulled from Magneto, who, why do I have to remind everyone about this? Magneto is a villain. He says, "I'm not ashamed of what I am. Let them try to stop us this time." Now, you might think that this is consistent with everything that you've ever read about the X-Men and a lot of the, ideological wars between Xavier and Magneto. But no, that's not what our Twitter geniuses have to say about it. This one was from Brett Schechner from Graphic Policy, who stated, "Hickman has positioned the future of X-Men not as the allegorical representation of the struggling minority." Okay, I'm going to pause you there. That's psychobabble. He's saying he hasn't positioned it about basically the plight for minorities, struggling minorities, which is essentially what everyone believes the X-Men needs to be about all the time, which I highly disagree with. I think you can relate to it no matter what. You don't have to be so on the nose. That's wrong, actually. Don't be on the nose, with what the moral of the story is. Allow people to interpret it and relate to it however they want. All right, second half of this nonsense. Instead, Hickman's X-Men has taken on the role of nationalist, specifically the white nationalist raging against their inevitable loss of two demographics and the future. Now, that is a huge leap. I think the whole two-state thing, first off, we've already established that Magneto is the bad guy. He's exploring these ideas and the clashing ideologies, which they've always done in X-Men. I mean, even in the films, they've done the same exact thing time and time again. You could also frame this differently and say that, it's like a university, and really Magneto is just trying to find a safe space for people, and so he's going to make some area of the world that's a safe space specifically for mutants to live in. Do you see how this works? The whole segregation argument is silly when you still have the same idea. Problem is, Magneto is still the bad guy. Not only that, but the story's not over yet. So, hold on. All right, and here's his conclusion. He says, "While I'm excited as to where this all goes at the same time, it feels like the heart of the X-Men has been ripped out of them. They have often reflected the socio-political reality of the time, and here they take on the role of the bad guys, nationalists fighting for dominance due to a perceived superiority. Everything is politics. And this is why it blows my mind, because Bleeding Cool, the same kinds of people that would say that there hasn't been any political shift or anything like that, either there have always been politics in comics, or there have never been politics in comics, we're just looking too hard for it. They're highlighting this exact same thing. Once they make a book that just has broad mainstream appeal, you automatically have people that say, no, I want it to reflect my politics. This is why making a set of comics, mainstream comics, that are just truly for the mainstream and allowing people to relate to them however they choose to relate to them, and to interpret morals from it however they choose to interpret those morals. This is an important route to go. I'm not saying you can't make political comics. Those can exist. Go for it. Go nuts. I don't care. But you shouldn't be forcing every single title to be political, especially ones that arguably have not always been, aligned with your regressive politics. All right, fighting for dominance. Yeah, and that's, you're kind of jumping the shark here a little bit. Perceived superiority. This is not new stuff. All right, he continues. And much like those nationalists, in all reality, they will lose when Moria dies down on the road, and this is all rebooted again. Well, that's a bit extreme, but let's see what Bleeding Cool has to say about it. To what extent was Brett right? Well, that's a great question. To what extent was he right? Well, the comic book storyline sees the characters come down entirely on the side of Magneto, who wanted mutants and humanity to live apart, ideally humanity ruled over by mutant kind, which is pretty nationalistic and separatist. Okay, here's the thing. Nationalism is a loaded term, because if you're talking about the nation that you live in and being a nationalist, that's one thing. If you talk about racial nationalism, that is a different thing. There might be a little bit of overlap, but it is a different thing. In this case, this wouldn't even be racial nationalism. This would be mutant nationalism. And separatism, again, you can't have a problem with separatism if you're also agreeing that there should be separatism in like every school anywhere. All right, it continues, but also the result of a massive war against mutant kind by humankind. Histories that Moria have lived through and now shared with Professor and Magneto. In the series, we see humanity go about to do exactly the same thing again with a mother mold. Rather than being a reflection of white nationalism, it smacks more of Israel, Jewish settlers finding a homeland after the horrors they were just subjected to during the Second World War. Okay, here's the thing. I get it, like that's another conclusion you could draw, but you see, this is the game that you're playing, because you could also say, hey, this is kind of like growing up in middle school, and you've got the jocks or whatever, and they're mean to you and they're mean to your friends, and so your friends decide to get together and be proactive and sort of build their own thing. You know what I mean? You can interpret this however you want, and ideally that's how storytelling works the best. You can read it and interpret it how you want. You can also draw lessons from this. And again, the story's not over. It would not surprise me at all if this ends up going horribly wrong, because most storytelling things go horribly wrong. All right, I'm going to skip a little bit. He says, indeed, I don't think we are meant to find the events entirely palatable or settled, but it doesn't mean that Charles has been lying to everyone forever and arguing with Magneto all the time. Okay, so because from Charles' perspective, Magneto was always right. What do I do? I just broke it there. Okay, so he said that he asked the random Twitter person to see if it was closer to Zionism rather than white nationalism or any other kind of national. Why is it always going to be white nationalism? It has nothing to do. If they're X-Men and you're always drawing the conclusion that that is minorities, why would you pick white nationalism? All right, so the response here from random Twitter person was, good question. It has aspects of both, especially when you look at the quasi-religious aspects of Krakoa X-Men, but they go beyond just the establishment of a homeland. Non-mutants are allowed to live or really enter their community. That's beyond Zionism. Okay, here's the one thing I'm not going to get through all this. All right. Jonathan Hickman made a story that people are talking about. I have heard people talking about it that love it, I've seen it all over Twitter. It's hard for me to ignore. And I'm not a huge X-Men fan, but I'm really tempted to read it because everyone has such good stuff to say about it. And on the other hand, you've got people trying to figure out, just like they did here, trying to figure out what it means and how it's evil. It's getting people to talk. Now, I hope that Jonathan Hickman can carry on and do the story as he intends to do it, and none of this will matter. The problem is that when you and I criticize a comic book and we get sick of the political messages in it, it falls on deaf ears and it doesn't matter. And we're told that we're bad people. And at the same time, one random person on Twitter can say that a comic book that's meant for mainstream audiences is problematic, and it doesn't matter. The corporations will bend the knee and they will change things as much as they can. They'll make apology runs of X-Men. I can see it right now happening. Give them a couple years, 2 years, there will be so much propaganda in comics. It'll be deafening, and no one will talk about it because no one's buying it. So let me know what you think about all of this. Have you been reading House of X and what's the other one called? Powers of X, so on and so on. Or have you been enjoying it? Is there some truth to this white nationalism claim? Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a thumbs up, all that great stuff. And yeah, I'll see you next time.